I and the future crown princess. A woman who had traveled 1,000 miles to find her husband stopped my carriage in the street. She took out the crown prince's personal jade pendant and boldly declared that she and the crown prince were already married in a village ceremony. What she didn't know was that my engagement to the crown prince was a public declaration of imperial favor. That seat was not hers to take.
1.
When the crown prince saw me, a flicker of shock crossed his face. After all, behind me stood that same woman, Jiang Xinhua, the one who'd journeyed from afar to find her husband. She paid no mind to the strange looks from the palace guards and maidservants. She darted out from behind me, threw herself into the crown prince's arms, wrapped her arms around his waist, and called out softly, "Husband." In that moment, every gaze turned to me. But I kept my composure, as a lady from a noble family should, and gently coughed into my handkerchief. The crown prince was still dazed, but the sound of my light coughs finally brought him back to his senses. He looked down at the woman in his arms and asked, "Xinhua, what are you doing here?" He seemed about to say more but hesitated. Instead, Jiang Xinhua blinked her tear-filled eyes, a delicate vulnerability shining through her expression. She looked up at the crown prince, her eyes instantly reddening. Her voice trembled as she said, "Didn't you tell me you were just going to the capital to find your relatives? Why didn't you come back? I've been searching for you so long. It's been so hard." Everyone's eyes were fixed on the two of them. Even I, in that moment, became nothing more than a spectator, waiting to see how the crown prince would explain himself. But he stammered for quite a while before finally saying, "At the time, things were uncertain. I didn't dare tell you everything. I was planning to send someone for you once things were settled." As soon as he finished, Jiang Xinhua turned her gaze on me. There was a flicker of scrutiny, then a glint of hostility in her eyes. Her voice softened, tinged with just the right amount of hurt, as she said to the crown prince, "But after I arrived in the capital, everyone said the crown prince was about to get married, and that the crown princess was preparing to move into the Eastern Palace. Then, what am I supposed to be?" Tears fell from her eyes at just the right moment. The crown prince, feeling pity for her, gently wiped her tears and comforted her, saying, "Now that you're here, stay. As for the rest, we'll discuss it later." Jiang Xinhua was a clever woman. She knew when to ease back and when to press forward. After earning his sympathy, she didn't keep pushing. As for the rest that the crown prince mentioned, most likely, he meant her status. A maid led Jiang Xinhua to the back courtyard. As she brushed past me, she shot me a faintly smug glance, a subtle challenge dancing in her eyes, her lips curled into a soft smile. "This Jiang girl, she's clearly no ordinary woman." And as for me, I said nothing to the crown prince and simply turned and returned to the Shin family estate. But bad news never stays buried. Word that the crown prince had already married a woman in secret quickly spread across the capital, turning into a laughingstock during tea and meals. My engagement to the crown prince became a joke. Naturally, the Shun family was deeply shamed. Though the marriage had yet to be formally sanctioned by the palace, he had already conducted a wedding ceremony with Jiang Xinhua among the common folk. Their union was publicly acknowledged. Even he admitted it himself. Everyone praised Jiang Xinhua for her good fortune. Once a mere fisherman's daughter from Jiangnan, she had rescued a drowning young man by the river, only to discover he was none other than the crown prince himself. They said she was born under a lucky star, fated to rise overnight. Only I was left in an awkward and humiliating position. No matter where I went, I was met with curious and judging looks. So I stayed home, refusing all invitations from other households. I was waiting for the crown prince to come and explain himself.
2.
He arrived just as I was pruning orchid leaves in the courtyard. "Has your highness found a solution?" I looked up at him, noting how he lacked his usual composure. "Shun Sueha, you shall be the crown princess. As for Xinhua, she'll be named a secondary consort and entered into the royal family registry. That is the greatest compromise I can offer." He looked resolute, even slightly proud of his decision. The greatest compromise? as if bestowing the title of crown princess on me were some great favor. Oh, so Jiang Gunyang is willing to accept being a concubine instead of the main wife. I continued tending to the orchid leaves, my voice calm and unbothered. He frowned slightly before replying. Xinyu only cares about me. She's not like other women who are obsessed with titles and rank. That last comment sounded like a subtle jab. Obsessed with rank? Was he suggesting I craved the title of crown princess? Even if she wanted it without the palace's approval, it wasn't hers to take. I chuckled softly and said, since Jiang Gunyang is so noble in character, she deserves a virtuous gentleman. What a pity. His expression darkened. Sharp-tongued, just like always. I let out a short laugh, unconcerned. He clearly caught my sarcasm. I was pitying Jiang Xinyu for tying herself to someone who wasn't a true gentleman, and pitying him for not being one. He spoke again. Xinyu is a gentle, submissive girl who avoids conflict. She won't stand in your way. But you've been proud and willful for years. If you can't tolerate her, then it's you who'll cause discord in the household. I came today to warn you. What I won't tolerate are underhanded tricks in the inner chambers. So, even before the marriage, he'd already chosen sides. Oh, but I am spoiled and headstrong. I'll surely make things unpleasant for the crown prince and for your dear concubine in the future. I spread my hands, unapologetic. He was livid and seemed ready to argue. Do you know the 3 obediences and 4 virtues? The moral codes of a wife? After marriage, a woman obeys her husband. A husband is the pillar of a wife. With your attitude, how can I ever allow you to do as you please? I waved him off with a smile. Then we'll talk about it after the wedding. He stormed off, furious. Now, this Grand Marquis estate held only me and my grandmother. My father and elder brother had died on the battlefield, wrapped in blood-soaked armor. This marriage was the emperor's way of honoring their sacrifice. The title of crown princess was immovable. All the crown prince could do was offer Jiang Xinyu a secondary position. On the night of the Lantern Festival, I sat on a pleasure boat docked by the river and watched as the crown prince walked through the lantern fair with her, winning prizes for her and painting portraits together on the bustling streets, gazing into each other's eyes. The crowd didn't know who they were, but they praised them nonetheless. Such a handsome couple, a perfect match. I imagine the crown prince had long resented this imperial marriage, and now he openly humiliated me without care. I toyed with my wine cup, then downed several drinks in succession. I stepped off the boat, walking gracefully to a nearby spot, and stood quietly, watching the two of them. Their laughter stopped the moment they noticed me. My presence had clearly ruined their mood. The crown prince ignored me and led her away. I took the lantern a maid handed me, stepped down the stone steps, and crouched beside the river. I placed the lantern gently into the water, watching as it floated slowly downstream. Behind me, my maid Qing, he was seething with anger. Miss shouldn't be treated like this. You're not even married yet, and the crown prince already behaves so brazenly. If you do marry him and he favors her, won't she walk all over you? I rose slowly, still gazing at the drifting lanterns, and smiled faintly. Royal affection. How long does it really last? If she truly believes in the power of his fleeting favor, then she's not even worth my attention. 3. When I returned to the estate, I heard my grandmother wanted to see me. I entered Shokong Court. She was resting with her eyes closed, slowly turning the prayer beads in her hand. No doubt the recent rumors in the capital had already reached her ears. When she opened her eyes, she asked quietly, "Was the lantern fair lively? Did you enjoy yourself?" I nodded with a smile. It was bright and bustling, very lively. To stay composed, that's what matters. Life is not about winning a single night. Her voice was gentle, clearly trying to comfort me. The crown prince had been ambushed during his trip to Jiangnan, saved by Jiang Xinyu, and they had fallen for each other, marrying in secret among commoners. Now she had come to the capital, and I, the future crown princess, had become the subject of ridicule. In times like this, I had to remain dignified. Acting like a hysterical, grieving woman would only invite more mockery. And that was something I could never be. I walked to her side and answered obediently. Granddaughter understands. I know where I stand. Jiang Xinhua had now been brought into the palace. I heard she was being taught court etiquette by a senior matron. Clearly, the Empress had already accepted the Crown Prince's wishes. She likely disapproved of me as Crown Princess, too. After all, the Marquis of Jingant's household had already fallen. My standing in the capital now depended solely on imperial favor and past military merit. But there was no future glory left to speak of. This marriage was merely a facade, a gesture from the emperor to show his appreciation for a loyal family. My identity no longer brought the crown prince any advantage. Instead, he was expected to elevate me, to bring honor to a declining noble house. The empress resented that, which was why she didn't mind using Jiang Xinhua to vex me. Word was that Jiang Xinhua was learning quickly and had won the praise of her instructors. Even the empress herself was said to be quite fond of her. The empress hosted a flower viewing banquet and sent me an invitation. It was one I couldn't refuse. But when I arrived, I saw Jiang Xinhua standing beside the empress, close and familiar. The empress even picked a peony herself and placed it in Jiang Xinhua's hand, praising her grace and propriety. Then she said, with such satisfaction, that having someone like her beside the crown prince put her at ease. The people around us joined in, showering Jiang Xinhua with compliments, while casting knowing glances at me. The empress had publicly acknowledged her, and in doing so, made her stance against me perfectly clear. Jiang Xinhua basked in their flattery, her smile triumphant, her eyes full of smug challenge. She had become the empress's weapon against me. As the crowd gathered and chatted, I had no desire to join their talk. I slipped away and sat alone in a small pavilion at the edge of the garden. But Jiang Xinhua followed me. She sat across from me without invitation and said with a soft laugh, "Have you seen things clearly now, Miss Shin? If you marry into the Eastern Palace, this is what awaits you." That arrogance, who had she learned it from? Even if the Empress and the Crown Prince don't like me, this is as far as they can go. What you want, you still won't get, I replied calmly. Her eyes flickered with frustration before she snapped. That's right. How could I compare to you, Miss Shin? With your father and brother's lives traded for your noble status. But tell me, when you dream at night, does your heart ache? The next moment, she gasped in pain, clutching her face in panic. My slap had already landed. She was left in utter shock. I had ignored all her past provocations, but this time, she had crossed the line. I grabbed her by the throat and shoved her back against a pillar, pressing harder. My father and brother died on the battlefield, wrapped in blood and iron. You have no right to speak of them. The title of Crown Princess you so desperately covet, compared to their lives, is worth nothing.
4.
The panic in her eyes was unmistakable. She clearly hadn't expected me to lay a hand on her in the inner palace. Jing'an Marquis Manor is a military household. My father and brother were both gifted generals. I may be a woman who cannot fight on the battlefield, but that doesn't mean I'm weak and helpless. If there's a next time, it won't just be a warning like this. With that, I slowly let her go. She looked as if she wanted to call for help, but I warned again. You've had enough attention for one day. Make any more noise, and the consequences won't be worth it. Only then did she back down. I didn't want to entangle myself with her any further. I'd already shown my face at the banquet and fulfilled my duty to the Empress. On the way back in the carriage, he muttered angrily, "The royal family's gone too far. Master and young master gave their lives for this country, died on the battlefield, and now they dare bully you just because there's no one left to support you." I patted her shoulder gently and said quietly, "People forget the dead as soon as the tea cools. Who really remembers? When the emperor mentions them, it's called honoring his loyal ministers. But if we bring it up, they say we're flaunting past merits. Besides, the imperial marriage decree was just the emperor signaling to his court that he hadn't mistreated the descendants of his generals. But once the decree was issued, He no longer cared whether I was treated fairly in the inner palace. I'm nothing more than a tool for the emperor to showcase his so-called kindness. Her eyes turned red at the corners, but she dared not speak further. When I returned to the estate, I received a letter. It was from one of my father's old subordinates. I had only left the capital for a few days, yet upon my return, I heard the crown prince had requested imperial permission to inspect the northern border, an excuse to gain experience. He also asked to postpone the wedding for another 2 years. This move made it crystal clear. He wanted to drag things out indefinitely. And as if that weren't enough, Jiang Xinhua made a huge scene at the Jing'an Marquis Manor, causing my grandmother to faint from the rage. The servants found me at the city gate and rushed me home. I arrived just in time to see Jiang Xinhua preparing to leave, looking utterly smug and superior. But I understood now, she was relying on someone's backing. Without the Empress's tacit approval, how would she dare to behave like this? The moment she saw me, her tone turned cutting. Your father and brother are gone. Jing'an Marquis Manor is just an empty shell now. Once you're married off, only your frail grandmother will be left here. The house is in decline. How long do you think it can hold on? The Empress and the Crown Prince despise you. Why keep clinging to what's already lost? My hands clenched tightly. I choked up and replied, the Empress and the Crown Prince favor you, indulge you, so that gives you the right to humiliate the Jing'an Marquis Manor? My father and brother died with honor, buried in distant mountains. Now there's no one left to hold this family together. Only my grandmother and I remain. If you want the position of Crown Princess, then take it. As the words left my mouth, tears streamed down my cheeks. I sobbed uncontrollably, directing all the blame toward the Empress and the Crown Prince. The Empress thought she could stay above it all, but it wouldn't be so easy. Crowds had gathered at the gates, drawn by the commotion. They whispered and pointed, discussing the Empress and the Crown Prince, drawing connections to all the recent gossip surrounding Jiang Xinhua. Shen family's men died for the country, and now only the old lady and a young girl remain. Being humiliated like this, it's heartbreaking. If the royal family doesn't want the marriage, they should just cancel it. Why go this far to disgrace them? I heard that woman is the Crown Prince's favorite, clever and full of tricks. The Empress adores her, and the Crown Prince does whatever she says. She's arrogant because she's backed by power. Typical behavior from someone relying on others. Rumors. While they can wound me, they can also be my weapon. The Empress sought to humiliate me, letting the rumors spread in hopes that I would retreat and give up the marriage willingly. But her recent actions, combined with today's scene, painted a different picture. One where she abused a noble house with no defender. And that would chill the hearts of the loyal ministers still watching. Today's public outcry was aimed directly at the Crown Prince. Eventually, Jiang Xinhua couldn't stand the storm of public condemnation. She fled in disgrace. I watched her retreating figure, so flustered and pitiful, and found it laughable. When I pretend to be weak, it forces them into the spotlight. This whole scene today was a trap I set just for her. I wasn't afraid of her making a scene. I was afraid she wouldn't. After visiting my grandmother, I instructed the servants to search the entire city for the best doctors. Soon, the city was in an uproar. Rumors flew through the aristocratic families of the capital. But this time, they weren't just laughing at me. Censors submitted memorials one after another, accusing the Crown Prince of lacking moral conduct, causing chaos within the palace, and disregarding proper rights. Senior ministers even wrote to the emperor, criticizing the mistreatment of a war hero's descendants and denouncing the royal family's indifference. They said such behavior chilled the hearts of the loyal and faithful.
5.
The Crown Prince was publicly scolded by the emperor in court. A steady stream of imperial gifts was sent to the Shen family, meant to express the emperor's sympathy and appeasement. The imperial physician also paid a visit and reported that my grandmother had fainted due to a sudden surge of anger. She would need time and peace to recuperate. Amazingly, the Crown Prince came in person, bearing a variety of precious supplements, and he brought Jiang Xinhua with him. But neither of them looked particularly pleased. After all, This visit was essentially a forced concession. Most likely, they were compelled to come under pressure and had no choice. Behind them, the palace attendants carried crates of rare medicinal herbs, entering in a neat line. The crown prince gave a light cough and asked, "How is the old lady?" "I came to pay my respects." I raised my hand slightly, and a maid stepped forward to lead him towards Shokong Court. His visit was clearly due to imperial pressure, a performance for appearance's sake. There was no need for me to listen in. He would simply say some empty words of concern to my grandmother. Then, he had a servant present me with an embroidered box. Inside lay a jade pendant, an azure wand carved from the finest jade. This was a specially crafted emblem, bestowed only upon the crown princess. It symbolized nobility and status. But my mind flashed back to the day Jiang Xinyu showed me that smooth white jade pendant, his personal token. 2 pendants. And the closeness between the two of us was already plain to see. The crown prince looked at the jade and said softly, "Our wedding will not be delayed again. The Ministry of Rites has already chosen the date. It's set for the 16th of next month. As for Xinyu, she has agreed to step down and become a secondary consort. As long as you two can get along, it will be a blessing for the Eastern Palace." Step down? As if she were granting me this position? Even after all that had happened, the crown prince still hadn't woken up. He still believed that letting me walk through the gates of the Eastern Palace was some grand favor. The emperor had placed him under house arrest and rejected his requests to inspect the northern border and delay the wedding. Everyone in court knew about it. Even this visit today was only because of the emperor's pressure. Yet he still thought that sharing a household with both wife and concubine living peacefully would resolve everything. My gaze darkened slightly as I replied in a soft voice, "Your Highness should save this until after the wedding." When I didn't accept the jade, displeasure crept into his expression. His voice lowered in irritation. "Yes, Xinyu made a scene out of jealousy. But the emperor has already scolded me and punished her. All the proper compensations and honors have been given to the Shin family. What more do you want? If you keep pushing, you'll end up with nothing." His voice was full of frustration. "If your Highness has come to make peace, then at least show a proper attitude," I said coldly. That finally sobered him. He softened his tone slightly. He continued on to exchange pleasantries with my grandmother, but I stepped out of Shokong Court and saw Jiang Xinyu standing by the pond. This was my grandmother's courtyard. She likely didn't dare enter. Though she had come with a lowered head today, forced into submission, I could still see a flicker of resentment in her eyes. I'd heard that the Empress Dowager's most trusted matron had stayed in the Eastern Palace for a month, tasked with training her. She had likely come to understand just how grueling palace life could be. Her complexion was pale, her gaze a little unsteady. But this wasn't enough. I still had something more shocking to tell her. "You look very much like someone," I said. "The current wife of the Minister of Justice." Her lips trembled. Her eyes were filled with alarm as she stared at me in shock. "What did you say?" I repeated calmly. "You bear a striking resemblance to the current wife of the Minister of Justice, 7 parts, at least. When the crown prince looks at you, what he sees is another woman. One he longed for but never attained. One he regrets losing." 6. Impossible. She stumbled back a step, fear and panic clearly written in her eyes. I knew exactly what she was afraid of. Her entire standing, her pride, her dignity, was tied to the crown prince. Punishments from the palace, harsh as they might be, could only touch the surface. What she truly couldn't afford to lose was his heart. If all the affection he'd shown was false, if all his tender gazes had been meant for someone else, what would she have left? But these were the truths she would have to face. You can go see the Minister of Justice's wife for yourself. Then, compare her features to the portrait in the Eastern Palace's archive room. You'll have your answer. 3 years ago, I had once wandered into that archive and come across the painting. That was when I realized the crown prince harbored a secret longing he could never voice. And the moment Jiang Xinyu stopped my carriage in the street, the moment I saw her face, I knew with certainty whom the crown prince's heart truly belonged to. Jiang Xinyu stood there, pale as a sheet. Even when the crown prince emerged, she remained in a daze, trailing after him like a shadow. As they left, I saw the grand imperial carriage waiting outside, opulent and dazzling, clearly meant to draw attention. The onlookers gathered around, murmuring endlessly. What a spectacle! The crown prince had made such a public show of his visit, purely so the emperor and the people could see that he had come in person, to quell the rumors. I watched as he reached out, helped Jiang Xinyu into that extravagant carriage, and left in grand fashion. So much noise and display. He had certainly put a lot of effort into appearances. Back at the estate, I sat by my grandmother's bedside. She lay reclined on the couch, quietly rotating the prayer beads in her hands. In a low voice, she said, "You handled everything well this time." I responded in a steady tone, "You taught me since I was little. No matter what, even if there are only women left in the Jing'an Marquis household, we must never let others trample us." I've always remembered that. The moment the servant found me at the city gate that day, I sensed something in his words, subtle hints. I'd already guessed my grandmother's plan, so I followed the lead. I deliberately stirred things up, openly showed weakness, and let the people's voices blow the matter out of proportion. In the end, what the public saw was this. The Empress and the Crown Prince resented me, used Jiang Xinyu to stir trouble at the Marquis Manor, and bullied us because no men remained in our household. Their aim? To force a withdrawal from the marriage. My grandmother collapsed in rage, and I, left with no support, had no choice but to give up the position of Crown Princess. My grandmother fainted in fury. I wept bitterly in public. That was enough to steer public opinion in a different direction. Now the talk in the capital was that the royal family had gone back on their word, breaking a marriage arrangement and mistreating the descendants of loyal generals. That they turned a blind eye while others insulted the Shin family because no one was left to defend it. Back then, my father and brother held the line at Qingyang Pass, never retreating, never surrendering, until the very last breath. The wind and snow buried them along with their blades. After that battle, only grandmother and I remained. When news of our loss reached the capital, the emperor, seeking to demonstrate his imperial grace, bestowed this marriage upon me. But times change. People forget. No one talks about the brutal war at Qingyang Pass anymore. No one remembers the lives my father and brother gave. All they see is that the Shen family has no successor, that the Jing'an Marquis Manor is in decline. And so, they decide I'm no longer fit to marry the crown prince. In the Empress's eyes, there were plenty of noble daughters in the capital who were more worthy of the crown prince, women who could offer real political alliances, who could help stabilize his position. But the emperor had used his marriage to proclaim his benevolence. He used the honor of the Eastern Palace to decorate the falling house of Shin. The Empress wanted to shame me and my grandmother quietly, hoping we would take the hint and back down. But things have already gone beyond what she expected, and beyond her control. Her constant praise of Jiang Xinyu, her obvious favoritism, was merely to stoke her arrogance, to use her as a weapon against me. She never intended to give her the title of crown princess. As for that village wedding between the crown prince and Jiang Xinyu, what a joke. To the Empress, it wasn't even worth mentioning. But she still gave Jiang Xinyu hope, letting her believe she could aim for what was never hers to begin with. She let her become a pawn, a tool for manipulation. My grandmother patted my hand, her eyes full of worry. "I don't have much time left. There isn't much more I can do for you. And the crown prince, he's not a good man." "I know," I replied quietly. "That's why this game isn't over." The moment I said it, she seemed to understand what I was planning. The crown prince believed today marked a reconciliation, that harmony between wife and concubine would follow, that the crisis was over. What a pity. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. 7. I returned to my courtyard, and Qing he brought me a cup of hot tea. As I quietly lowered my head to sip, she spoke again. "His Highness the Crown Prince came today and still brought that seductress with him. He clearly doesn't regard you at all, miss, and blindly favors her. After the wedding, how will you live like this?" Even the Empress speaks on her behalf. If you're bullied, No one will defend you. Once you're in the Eastern Palace, won't you just be left to be humiliated? I listened to this familiar line of reasoning and asked in return, "Then what do you think I should do?" She replied quickly, "Naturally, you should use the current momentum to make a scene. Teach the Eastern Palace a lesson so they won't dare look down on you." I gently placed the teacup back down and looked up at her, eyes steady. "Qing He, you've served in this household for 3 years. I've treated you fairly well, haven't I? Miss, your kindness to me is as deep as a mountain." "Why do you say this today?" she said, still smiling sweetly. "Good," I said. "If my kindness runs that deep, then it's time for you to repay it. I want to meet the master behind you." My voice was calm, but the smile on her face vanished instantly. Panic flashed in her eyes, though she stubbornly said, "Miss, must be joking. I despise traitors, yet I've tolerated you for so long. Must a blade rest on your neck before you realize I'm not joking?" I smiled faintly, my tone cold. With a loud thud, she dropped to her knees. "Please forgive me, Mississippi. Go." As dusk fell, she hurriedly left the estate. The next morning, she knelt before me again and whispered, "My master has agreed to meet you today." I boarded a carriage with her, but once we were outside the city gates, she blindfolded me with a silk veil. After arriving at our destination, she led me by the hand through what felt like layers of corridors, finally guiding me into a quiet courtyard. When the veil was removed, I saw the person before me, and I wasn't the least bit surprised. "Your Highness the Fourth Prince. It was you, after all." I lifted my gaze. He was dressed in a dark robe embroidered with intricate silver cloud patterns, dense and ornate, radiating opulence. He sat high above, looking at me with a leisurely, casual air. But in his eyes, I caught a flash of surprise. He said in a low voice, "Qing He mentioned before that you had a sharp and discerning mind, one she couldn't sway. But I didn't expect you to be clever enough to guess my involvement." "Not only did I guess your presence," I replied steadily, "I also realized there must be someone like Qing He at Jiang Xinyue's side, a pawn you placed there to fuel her ambition, to manipulate her thoughts, guiding her step by step to act according to your plan, so you could use her." I looked him straight in the eye, my voice unwavering, filled with certainty, not a hint of probing. The detached scrutiny on his face slowly faded. He let out a soft chuckle. "You're right. She's just a fisher girl from Jiangnan. Without my planning, my guidance in the shadows, how could she have found the crown prince so easily? How could she have developed the ambition to become mistress of the Eastern Palace? Too bad she'll never realize it. But you, now that you've uncovered all this and still chose to come meet me, what is it that you want?" He had placed pawns both by my side and by Jiang Xinyue's. He had tried to use us to further his game. From the very beginning, his invisible hand had been manipulating us, inciting conflict between me and Jiang Xinyue. Once things escalated, we'd both become pieces on his chessboard. The chaos that followed would involve multiple factions, and the Eastern Palace would naturally fall into disarray. The Crown Prince, besieged on all sides, would suffer losses in power and reputation, just as things stood now. Qing He had entered my household 3 years ago. That was when his hand reached toward the Jing'an Marquis Manor, when he planted the first seeds around me. He had laid out his strategy long ago, because I was the future crown princess. Jiang Xinyue's rescue of the crown prince happened just a year ago. Their marriage in the countryside and everything that followed were all carefully orchestrated and guided by him, step by step. I smiled faintly. "You ask what I came here for? Are you worried I'll ruin your plans?" His gaze darkened, unreadable. "You needn't worry, Your Highness. I've seen the full scope of this game, but I have no intention of destroying it. I came to meet the one moving the pieces, to tell you that I will not be anyone's pawn, but I can be your most valuable ally." He finally looked directly at me, lifting his brow slightly. "You want me to help you?" I raised my eyes, meeting his gaze calmly and with confidence. "No, Your Highness. You're mistaken. I am offering to help you." The indifference he'd shown before completely vanished. In his eyes, I saw the flicker of astonishment before his expression turned serious. What did you say? You want to replace the crown prince as heir. And I'm willing to help you achieve that. Even as I finished speaking, doubt still clouded his face. So I spoke again, clearly and firmly. You placed Qing He at my side to provoke me, to push me to make a public scene, to force the annulment of the engagement, so the Eastern Palace's prestige would suffer, and the Crown Prince's reputation would crumble before the court and the people. I saw through your strategy, and I chose to go along with it. At that, I saw unmistakable disbelief in his eyes.
8.
I returned to the estate and went to see my grandmother. That evening, word spread throughout the capital. The old marchioness of the Jingen household had taken a turn for the worse. As for the rumor circulating among the people, it was said that the crown prince's visit to the manor, with Jiang Xingyue in tow, had caused the relapse. The two had been inseparable during the visit, agitating the elderly lady and worsening her condition. Soon, the tea houses and taverns were abuzz with the news. I sat quietly in the courtyard, listening to the wind and rain, tending to my flowers. Until one day, Qing He came to me and said, "All the rumors now say that the crown prince brought Jiang Xingyue to your house on purpose, to humiliate the Jingen Marquis manor. People are outraged and feel sorry for you." I gently put down the pruning shears in my hand. The time had come. Wearing her official court attire, grandmother personally entered the palace and knelt before Qianan Hall. She formally stated that the Shen family's blessings were too thin and that we were unworthy to be matched with the royal family. She petitioned the emperor to rescind his decree and choose a more suitable match for the crown prince. I followed behind her, kneeling at her back. All the palace attendants and noble officials watched as the two of us knelt on those dozens of white jade steps, just a grandmother and her granddaughter, the last of the once glorious Jingen Marquis family. Many who passed by sighed softly, their eyes filled with sorrow at the contrast. The valiant military house of the past, now reduced to two women, forced to suffer indignity. In the end, the emperor issued a decree granting our request. He also bestowed upon us 10,000 taels of gold and 10,000 mu of fertile land. The matter had already become a public spectacle. To continue resisting would have brought humiliation not just to us, but to the entire imperial family. The Shen family's voluntary withdrawal was the best possible solution, a way to cut losses and save face. Supporting grandmother as we walked along the palace path, I looked up at the red walls and green tiles of the palace and only felt suffocated. It was the boundless world outside the palace that brought comfort. Once in the carriage, I lowered the curtain and leaned quietly against my grandmother. "The Empress and Crown Prince both wanted me to bow out on my own," I said softly, "but they never expected it to unfold like this. They had hoped I would suffer in silence, swallow blood with broken teeth, obediently step aside, and keep the damage to a minimum, not stir up a storm seen by the entire world." Grandmother held my hand and said in a low, steady voice, "The men of the Shin family had blood in their hearts, and the women of the Shin family are not ones to swallow humiliation. After today, the Crown Prince's reputation would suffer. He would begin to lose the people's support." The emperor issued another decree, ordering the Crown Prince to remain confined to his residence for 6 months and abstain from court affairs. It was a veiled punishment, house arrest in all but name. I gradually faded from the public eye. The emperor's reward of 10,000 taels and fertile land was meant to soothe public sentiment and to quietly suppress the scandal. My continued presence would only keep the rumors alive, and that wasn't something the emperor wanted. I decided to leave the capital and manage affairs at one of our estates. I planned to reside at our countryside villa for an extended time, partly to avoid further attention. Before I departed, I encountered the fourth prince at the city gates. Our eyes met for a brief moment before we passed each other without a word. I brought with me a team of guards, household stewards, and elderly maids. Each day, I reviewed account books and managed trivial affairs. Life passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, a year had gone by. I heard that during the Crown Prince's confinement, the fourth prince had grown powerful. The emperor had entrusted him with great responsibilities, even assigning him command of the Fonlin Guard in the capital. He proposed policies that benefited both the people and the nation, earning widespread praise in the court. By the time the crown prince's confinement ended, he was no longer the formidable figure he once was. In fact, he was constantly overshadowed by the fourth prince. The emperor, too, had grown discontent with him, showing increasing signs of coldness. The court, still mindful of past scandals, had begun to doubt the crown prince's fitness as heir. Then came the next scandal. The crown prince held a banquet to assert his presence, but a shocking secret was exposed. A portrait of the Minister of Justice's wife was discovered in the Eastern Palace archive. News spread quickly that the crown prince had once harbored illicit desires for the wife of a court official.
9.
It was said that during the banquet, a guest accidentally wandered into the archive while drunk and knocked over a candle. In the chaos to extinguish the fire, many items were carried out. Among them, a hidden painting. It was unmistakably the crown prince's own work. He claimed the portrait was of Jiang Xinhua, but the inscription at the end clearly showed it had been painted several years ago, back when he hadn't even met Jiang Xinhua, which meant the woman in the painting wasn't her at all. It was Gu Jinshu, the wife of the current Minister of Justice. Gu Jinshu was the daughter of the Marquis of Yong'an. She had grown up in the palace and had once been close to the crown prince, almost childhood sweethearts. But she had been hastily married off to the Minister of Justice, a match arranged by the Empress. Looking back, it all made sense now. She had been the love he could never attain in his youth, the moonlight in his heart. His marriage to Jiang Xinhua was likely just an attempt to compensate for that loss. And all the affection he later showed Jiang Xinhua probably stemmed from his longing for Gu Jinshu's shadow. This Eastern Palace scandal was almost certainly orchestrated by the fourth prince. In its wake, many senior ministers submitted memorials to the court, claiming the crown prince lacked the virtue and talent to rule. They requested he be deposed and a more capable heir installed. The movement gained traction. The Eastern Palace stood on shaky ground. Everyone thought the court was about to undergo a major shift, and the fourth prince stood proudly at the center of it. But just days later, General Ji petitioned for permission to return to the capital. He spoke in defense of the crown prince multiple times, and slowly, the calls for deposition began to fade. Within days, all talk of deposing the crown prince seemed to vanish. General Ji was the crown prince's maternal uncle. The Ji family was the Empress's natal clan. Half a month later, I received an unexpected guest at the estate, the fourth prince himself. This time, he had come to see me voluntarily, and I was the one seated at the head of the room. "Your Highness, it's been a while," I said, raising my hand as a maid brought in hot tea. He wore the same elegant robes as before, but he seemed more agitated than calm, lacking the composure he once had. "You seem to have predicted I would come," he said, his eyes filled with calculation and scrutiny. I smiled faintly. Naturally. After all, I did say I would lend you my support. "To change the heir, one must first move the Ji family," he said, his voice cold and edged. I stood and walked to his side, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. My voice was low, firm. "Then let's remove this obstacle, the Ji family." He seemed surprised by the ambition and boldness in my words. Then he lowered his gaze and said, "I don't have enough evidence to bring the Ji family down." I met his eyes with unwavering resolve. My father and brother died at Qingyang Pass because of the Ji family's schemes. Deliberately delaying reinforcements, forming private factions, silencing loyal men, hoarding military credit. Are these crimes not enough? The fourth prince's expression turned grave. His eyes were wide with shock. Between me and the crown prince was not just the wound of a broken engagement, but a blood feud with his mother's family.
10.
The fourth prince stayed at the estate for only half a day before departing in haste. Just as the crown prince believed his position as heir was secure, turmoil once again erupted in the capital. General Ji was accused of embezzling military funds and providing substandard supplies to the front. The Ji family's 2 sons were reported for forcibly seizing farmland, one incident even resulting in a death. It was the fourth prince who had set this chain of events into motion. At first, The Ji family paid it little mind, thinking there would be room for negotiation as always. But when grandmother and I struck the drum of petition at the palace gates, the situation escalated drastically. Kneeling before the palace, I held a formal complaint in my hands and cried out the truth of Qingyang Pass, how General Ji had delayed sending reinforcements, resulting in the unjust deaths of my father and brother. I begged His Majesty to punish the traitor. I shouted my plea again and again until crowds of citizens gathered behind us. At first, they were merely shocked, but soon they were burning with outrage. At last, the palace gates opened. The emperor's personal eunuch summoned us into the throne hall. I knelt in that grand, opulent chamber before a full assembly of officials. Despite their gazes and the overwhelming presence of General Ji himself, eyes full of menace, I did not flinch. He accused me of slandering a high-ranking official of the court, saying it was a grave offense. He tried to intimidate me. I only straightened my back even more. Some debts, no matter how many years have passed, must one day be paid in full. I bowed deeply to the emperor and declared, "Your Majesty, I beg you to seek justice for my father and brother." Years ago, they led the vanguard to meet the enemy head-on. The battle at Qingyang Pass was fierce, but they swore to defend the city with their lives. Meanwhile, General Ji, though assigned as our reinforcement, delayed his march deliberately. He used their sacrifice to exhaust the enemy's strength. By the time the opposing forces were worn down, he launched his own attack with fresh troops and claimed an easy victory, reaping all the glory for himself. On the surface, my father and brother died by the enemy's blade. In truth, they were killed by the betrayal of their own ally. The world praises them as loyal and courageous men, but their deaths were avoidable. Lies. Utter nonsense. General Ji barked in fury. That day, a blizzard closed off the mountain pass. My army was trapped. There was no deliberate delay. "I have a witness," I said calmly. "The deputy general my father sent for aid, he still lives." Gasps filled the court. The emperor raised a hand. "Summon him." When the man entered, General Ji's expression instantly changed. The witness knelt and said, "Your Majesty, the late Marquis and his son defended Qingyang Pass with all they had. Our reinforcements never arrived. I was sent with a handful of men to beg General Ji for aid, but he refused. He ordered his army to hold position and even issued a command to execute me. I resisted and fell off a cliff during the struggle. By some miracle, I survived. When I woke, I learned that the Jing'an father and son had perished, and General Ji had returned victorious. I have lived in hiding for over a decade, waiting for this moment, this chance to expose the truth and beg your Majesty to punish the traitor and restore justice for the Jing'an family." The emperor's face turned stormy. His gaze toward General Ji grew sharp and cold. But I wasn't done. "Your Majesty, I also have physical evidence to present," I continued clearly. A letter penned by General Ji himself, stamped with his private seal, instructing the governor of Pengcheng not to dispatch reinforcements to Qingyang Pass. He had not only held back his own forces, he had cut off any chance of help from nearby troops. Pengcheng was close to Qingyang Pass and had a sizable garrison. Had they been allowed to assist, there might have been a chance, just a sliver, that my father and brother could have survived. The emperor read the letter, his rage barely contained. "General Ji, what do you have to say for yourself now?" The entire court knelt in silence. "Guards, arrest him." With irrefutable evidence laid bare, there was nothing left for General Ji to say. The imperial guards took him into custody. As we left the palace, grandmother and I leaned on each other. She sat silently in the carriage, tears falling freely from her eyes. She grasped my hand tightly, her voice trembling with relief. "You did it. You avenged them." The imperial decree of posthumous honor had already been issued. In front of the ancestral shrine of the Jing'an Marquis Manor, I knelt upon a prayer mat and wept openly, choking back sobs as I said, "Father, brother, if your spirits can see me now, I've done it. I've avenged you both." For more than 10 years, it was as though a heavy stone weighed upon my heart. Today, That stone has finally fallen, and I can finally breathe again. As I stepped out of the shrine, I felt, for the first time in years, an unfamiliar sense of peace. 11. The entire G family was imprisoned and tried jointly by the three judicial departments. The G family confessed to all charges and was sentenced to execution after the autumn trials. The Crown Prince and the Empress were placed under house arrest, heavily guarded. I slowly ascended to the highest level of Dengyan Tower and looked out over the four corners of the capital. The winds of change were sweeping through. Everything was about to shift. The fourth prince appeared beside me without a sound. At that moment, he radiated spring-like confidence and boundless ambition. "We are allies walking the same path now," he said. "You've helped me come this far. What I desire is already within reach. But what about you? What do you want? When I hold true power, I can grant you the position of imperial consort, or even empress if you wish. I can ensure lasting glory for you and the Jing'an Marquis Manor. Your Highness and I truly are kindred in strategy and logic, measuring gains and losses with clarity. But what I want isn't that." At my reply, surprise flickered in his eyes. Indeed, what he had offered was, in the eyes of the world, the best possible outcome. I was the last descendant of the Shin family. For a woman, family revival usually came through marriage alliances. He had made a sincere offer, yet that wasn't what I sought. Under his curious gaze, I knelt with determination and said, "With the merit of my support thus far, I ask that your Highness break convention when the time comes and grant me the unprecedented right for a woman to inherit a noble title." He froze in place, standing still in silence for a long time. At last, he reached down and helped me to my feet. In a solemn voice, he said, "Very well." Months later, the crown prince was deposed. The empress took her own life. The fourth prince became the new heir. The deposed crown prince, confined to a separate residence, set fire to the estate one night. The entire compound was engulfed in flames. People shook their heads with sighs. The former crown prince had never possessed true talent or virtue. He had only been granted the title by birthright. But his character had never been worthy of his role. The reigning emperor, exhausted by illness and a court in constant turmoil, finally succumbed to his ailments. The new emperor ascended the throne and issued a general pardon to the realm. He kept his word from that day in the garden and, despite overwhelming opposition, issued an edict that allowed me to inherit the title of Marquis of Jing'an. The day I entered the palace to give thanks, I saw him seated high upon the throne, already bearing the majesty and authority of a young sovereign. Granting me a noble title as a woman was a revolutionary act. It would surely spark endless debate and resistance. I had known from the start that only by helping him to power, by securing a great enough merit, could I earn the right to force such a change through the storm. The world believed the Shin family had no male heir and that the marquisate should end with us. But I defied convention, claiming the title as a woman, vowing to restore my house to glory. He climbed to the city tower, overlooking the rivers and mountains. I followed behind him. He asked softly, "I once promised you the title of imperial consort or empress. It would have brought honor to your house as well. Why did you refuse? The path you chose is far harder than the one I offered." I raised my eyes and answered with a bow. "Forgive my boldness, Your Majesty, but if I had entered the palace, would you have remained devoted to me alone, trusting me completely for a lifetime? Would you have kept the palace empty and taken no other women?" He hadn't expected such a direct question. His gaze dimmed briefly, but after a moment of reflection, he spoke firmly. "No. I would not risk the stability of the realm for the sake of any woman. I will fill the palace, balance court factions, and ensure heirs to secure the dynasty for generations." It was exactly the answer I expected. I responded just as steadily. To be empress or favored consort is a dream many women share, but it has never been mine. From childhood, I've borne the weight of reviving the Shin family. I want the Jing'an Marquis Manor to shine again, to flourish for 100 years, not become a mere footnote in history as a fallen clan tied to the throne. He looked at me with dawning clarity, then a trace of admiration flickered in his eyes. He smiled faintly. I once thought the title of Empress was the highest honor a woman could dream of. I never imagined your ambitions were so much greater. That expression, it was just like the one he wore long ago.
12.
Your Majesty and I are, in essence, the clearest of minds in this world, I said. A wise ruler and a loyal minister. That is the bond between us. You will achieve your grand vision, and I will fulfill the will of my father and brother, bringing glory to our name once more. You will have your 3 palaces and 6 courts to maintain political balance and continue your line, while I will find a man who sees only me, marry him into my household, and together we will restore the Shun family's former brilliance. I may be a woman, but I will not lose to any man. The Shun family will rise again. He was silent for a long moment, then said, almost wistfully, Your strength reminds me of my mother when she was young. She too had lofty ambitions, but was ultimately caged by the palace walls. Now you have the vast world at your feet, unbound by any palace or crown. If she could see this, she would surely be proud. Thank you, Your Majesty, for granting me this freedom. I will give my utmost in return for you and the realm. I bowed deeply. From this moment on, we were sovereign and subject. When I left the palace, the carriage rolled slowly forward. But then I heard a familiar voice. Please, I'm begging you. I haven't eaten in days. Help me, please. I lifted the curtain and saw a woman, hair matted, clothes filthy, her face smeared with dirt to the point of being unrecognizable. But I knew her voice. It was Jiang Xinhua. So she hadn't died in the blaze at the secondary residence. She had fled amidst the chaos, only to become a beggar. The memory of her once blocking my carriage on the street flashed in my mind. How vivid that moment had been. Now it felt like a lifetime ago. I stepped slowly down from the carriage. The moment she saw me, she tried to flee. The attendants stopped her. She dropped to her knees, clinging to the hem of my dress, trembling as she wept. I know I was wrong. Please, please let me go. I was used. The crown prince treated me as a substitute. Look at me now. I've lost everything. I don't care about riches. I don't understand palace schemes. I just want to go back to Jiangnan, to that small town by the water where the osmanthus blooms. I just want to be a simple fisherman's daughter again. I lifted my hand, slightly. A servant placed a small pouch of silver beside her. There's enough here to get you back to Jiangnan. Her face filled with shock. Then tears streamed down her cheeks. Her voice broke as she choked out. Thank you. If I could do it all over again, I'd never have set foot in this city. But that was all in the past. Back at the estate, it was nearly the end of the year. The entire household was decorated with lanterns and ribbons. Preparations were underway. I selected a number of lively, clever young maids to join the staff. The halls were filled with laughter and joy. On New Year's Eve, snow began to fall. Grandmother and I sat by the fire, keeping vigil through the night. A pot of warm wine simmered over the stove. She smiled and said, The shadows over the Shun family have lifted. From now on, may every year be blessed, and every day be peaceful. I raised my cup to her and replied with a smile, Year after year, may fortune shine. Day after day, may peace reign. Just then, firecrackers burst in the courtyard, ringing in the new year. Laughter echoed in the snow. The world was bright once more. The end.